Hello, this is a little story called Pineapple Air. It was mid-January and I had been invited to visit some French Canadian friends, Jack and his English wife, Jane, who lived on a little island in the Bahamas called Spanish Wells, which is just off of another island called Eleuthera. I had arrived in the capital, Nassau, the night before, and I found that the ferry to Eleuthera, which took 4 hours, was not operating. So I found an airline that had a rather fun name, Pineapple Air, and hurriedly booked online to fly to Eleuthera the next day. I got to the domestic terminal, but it was very hot and steamy at the terminal, and most people there seemed to be half asleep. They seemed to be dozing in the kind of thick, humid air. But I went to the check-in desk and handed over my passport to the lady who was half asleep anyway. She yawned. Oh, and she studied it for a bit, and while chewing on her pencil, there's no one with your name on the passenger list, so I can't check you in, she said. And she pushed my passport back to me. There must be, I said. I booked last night. She yawned. Pineapple won't take you if you're not on the passenger list. And the plane is full. It only takes 10 people. I clutched at the straw. Is there anyone with the surname Windsor on the passenger list? She looked at me rather suspiciously, as if she thought I intended to impersonate another passenger. And she continued to chew hard on her pencil. I could hear the pencil splintering. Yes, there is another one with the surname Windsor, but it's not you. It's Malbome Windsor. Malbome, Malbome. Are you related? I am the Malbome, I said. I must have mistyped my first name. Look at your keyboard. The V is next to the C, I said triumphantly, rather ignoring the fact that this was not the only spelling error in typing my own name. Well, she softened a bit. The chewing eased off. Well, I can't change names on the passenger list. I will check you in, but for this trip, you have to be the Malbome that it says on your boarding pass, or they won't let you fly. Well, what could I do? I agreed. I went inside to practice my new persona, being Malbome, and to look for the gate for Pineapple Flight 986 to Eleuthera. But it didn't appear on any departure board, even though it was to leave in 45 minutes by now. I asked at the information desk, where is the gate for Pineapple Air? She spoke with a wide yawn. Oh, someone will come, she said. I could see her tonsils. Still nothing on the departure board, but at that very moment, someone did come. A buxom black lady with startling hair. It was dyed in strips, alternatively orange and red. She appeared out of thin air, near where a small group of young people were standing. And as if she was saying something faintly embarrassing, she almost silently said, Pineapple Air 986, follow me. The young group of 9 people jumped to follow her, and so did I, hoping I'd heard her right, but I couldn't check as she took off at such a fast pace in spite of her bulk. We were all running after her like a line of ducklings following Mother Duck as she sprinted out down the long sloping corridor, out to the terminal and onto the tarmac without a backward glance to see if we were still there. And she sprinted to a stand which was furthest away from the terminal, where there was a small shabby looking aircraft, and on its tail was the label, Pineapple. I came 10th in the race, breathless in the heat. She was at the aircraft steps checking our boarding cards. I was still unsure if I had heard her right. After all, the flight had not been shown on any departure board. It was leaving at the wrong time, half an hour earlier than scheduled, and yet she was rushing us to it as if it was very late. I asked her breathlessly, am I on the right flight, 986 to Eleuthera? Do they go half an hour early? Oh, usually they do, she said. I was last on, but I had seat 1A, which is almost in the cockpit. There were two burly black guys flying the plane, and one of them turned to me with a piece of paper. He leaned over me. He closed the door first, nearly trapping my foot, and then he glanced at a piece of paper and turned to me. Are you Malvone? He said. Oh, yeah, Malvone. Oh, yeah, yes, that's me. Don't get off when we land, Malvone, he said. Don't get off when we land. I tugged at his wrist like a distressed toddler. What do you mean? Why shouldn't I get off when we get there? Because it won't be Eleuthera, Malvone. He barked at me as if speaking to a mentally defective who wasn't even sure of his own name. Well, that bit was true. I wasn't sure of my own name. So where will it be? I shouted over the revving engines. By now the plane was bumping madly away, hardly taxiing at all, and starting to take off almost from the stand itself. It'll be Governor's Island, Malvone, he shouted back at me. I had no idea where that was, but I knew I definitely didn't want to go there, as Jacques had told me I would be met at Eleuthera by a man called Pinder, who would take me across to Spanish Wells. Well, I sat there in seat 1A. I was almost in the cockpit. I could touch all the controls, and I saw that some of them were missing. And the gaps, some dials were missing, and the gaps had been very neatly covered over with aluminium cooking foil. I hoped that they weren't important. But after about 25 minutes flying over an azure sea dotted with islands and reefs, the plane landed at an airstrip at what I took to be Governor's Island. The plane stopped. Burly black guy pilot gave me a look as if to say, don't even think about getting off, Malvo. The other 9, though, did get off silently, and nobody got on. We took off again, and we flew skimming the sea for 10 minutes, then landed on a tiny island. When we got to the terminal building, it said North Eleuthera. It's a lovely name, isn't it? Eleuthera. Eleuthera is Greek for freedom. I got off alone and entered the building. A tall, thin black man in a very smart black suit, a pure white shirt, dark blue tie, and rimless glasses was there. He seemed to be expecting me. He was holding a Bible, a minister of the church. He half bowed and stood firmly in my way in the arrivals passage, gazing intently at me. Welcome, welcome. I thought I heard him say, or did he say, welcome, Malvo? I wasn't sure. Are you the only one? He said. Jack had told me that the Eleutherans were very religious indeed. I didn't know if he was asking me if I was the only passenger or the only Malvome, or even, given the fact he was holding his Bible, the only one, the Savior. I hesitated. I think so, I said, hoping that this was a kind of all-purpose answer. He gazed at me intently, almost adoringly. I felt very uncomfortable, especially as I, a non-believer, might be mistaken for the second coming of Jesus. Well, I knew I wasn't supposed to be myself on this trip, but if I had to choose, I was happier trying to be Malvome rather than trying to be Jesus. But the minister didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there silently. I tried to nod to him in a kind of benign way, like I imagined Jesus might have done, or perhaps Marvo might have done. But he still didn't move. I went past him and outside to the front door of the tiny terminal. Like a jack-in-the-box, up sprang a short white man who was sitting there. He called out, "Malcolm!" Was I supposed to be Malvome still? Fearing another trap, I did not at first identify myself. But then he said, "I am Derek. Jacques sent me." Wasn't he supposed to be Pinder? I recalled. But at that moment, 3 large people sweating in the heat, a woman and 2 men, appeared pushing an enormous trolley that held only one thing, my suitcase. The only one. Derek whisked it away to a van, but on the side of the van was painted the word Pinder. Well, I asked Derek how we got to Spanish Wells. "Well, I'll drive you about 20 minutes to a small dock, and then I will take you in my boat across to Spanish Wells," he said. We came to that small dock. 2 white men in filthy t-shirts were silently fishing, and an enormous black man with no shoes was walking around in circles, talking to himself quietly. No trouble. Derek drove past him gingerly to the end of the jetty and put my stuff on a small motorboat. It took us less than 10 minutes to get to Spanish Wells, where Jack and Jane were waiting. They greeted my driver. "Hi, Gurney," they said. I was confused. They whispered to me that Derek's name was not really Derek. It was Gurney. I didn't ask them about Pinder. Nobody in this country was who they thought they were, including me. Well, they took me to a really smart electric golf buggy, and I was put very high up at the front, over, I suppose, over the suitcases and things. I was a raised seat at the back, much higher than them, and there was a canopy which didn't extend to me, so I was much above them with no canopy. Spanish Wells is an island only about 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. We drove first along a dock with fishing boats, and then I saw on the quayside lobster pots, which were piled high, and people were buzzing about on these buggies, and they waved to each other as they passed on the narrow roads. They all seemed to know each other. We were quickly out of the little town of Spanish Wells, and I could see soon a turquoise sea and a beach of sand as sparkling white as a minister's shirt, and no one at all was on it. Palm trees grew on the beach, loaded with coconuts. It was as if Malvome was in an illustration from a glossy holiday brochure. Well, we got to their house in 5 more minutes, but on the way, waving from the small, smart electric buggy to everyone that we saw on the way. Well, they waved, so I waved too, though I didn't know a soul. I waved, of course, from my high point above everyone else. Malvome was behaving a bit like the Pope. Well, we got there. It was a charming, comfortable wooden house, very English decor inside. It was painted light blue on a slight rise, only a few yards from the glistening Caribbean Sea. Bananas and tomatoes and avocados grew in their garden, and across the sea from the kitchen window, but too far away to be seen, lay poverty-stricken Haiti and communist Cuba. I'd come from grey, cold, mid-January Britain, but here the sun shone. It was tropically warm. A few white, puffy clouds drifted across the sea. It was heaven. Jane made me a cup of tea. Earl Grey, she said. A biscuit. Bliss. I could stop being Malvo. All was well. It was Elusera. Thank you.